This is my 1940 Buick 8 Special, and in this video I am going to remove the head and take the piston out with the connecting rod and replace the connecting rod that's making some noise. This is a situation where a couple summers ago I was driving and I threw a rod. The rod went right through the block, and what had happened was I just drove it home on 7 cylinders and ended up taking the connecting rod out in pieces. And over that course of that summer I ended up getting 2 replacement engines. So for the heck of it, I just decided to see what I could do just to limp this engine along, because I had nothing to lose. So I slapped a new connecting rod in there, and I put a new piston in, and you know, it's worked since, but the noise is still there. And the reason I believe the noise is still there is because I bought a standard connecting rod that, you know, this is a Babbitt set of connecting rods in here. These are not insert bearings. So I went on eBay and I bought a standard connecting rod, and I think this crankshaft has been ground before. So there was some play, there was too much play, but I just said screw it, I put it in. It got me through. The car still works, but it makes a little noise. So the purpose of this video is to go ahead back in there and put a different connecting rod in that's a little bit smaller, or larger I should say, to make up for that clearance. And you know, if it gets me through for a few more summers, great. At some point I'm gonna have to put the new engines in, or one of the new engines in, but at this point I'm just gonna limp it along. So you'll see me in this video take the head off, the exhaust manifold, all that stuff, and remove the connecting rod and show you how to replace that. I wanted to show you, just to take a step back for a second, what happened. This here is the disaster that occurred on the car when I threw the rod a number of years ago. And this is what I ended up doing. I took a couple pieces of sheet metal and just putting it on there with some blue RTV sealant. And for the last few years it's worked great. I haven't had any leaks or anything. I just slapped it on there with some sealant and that's done the trick. You know, there's no compression down there, so it's just like patching a hole. It's no big deal. Anyway, that's what happened when I was on the road. I threw the rod. The rod was all mangled up in there, blasted a hole in the side of the block. There's another shot of it. I had to take that rod out in pieces with a sawzall and a grinder. There's the connecting rod. You can see it was all mangled up. It was a big mess. Here's another shot of it. You can see it was a pretty big hole. Anyway, what I did is I took a piece of sandpaper and a strip of sandpaper with a shoelace and went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and cleaned up the crank, shined it up to get rid of any burrs or any scoring. And I just went back and forth until I polished it up real nice. And there's the parts I removed. You can see the on the top of the piston, the imprint of the valves. Fortunately, the valves weren't damaged. It was just the piston itself, which I ended up replacing, and those are the parts I ended up taking out. The valves looked pretty good. There was no damage. So anyway, I wanted to show you that because that's what I ended up doing, and this is the way the car looks now with that plate on there. And for the last couple of years, it's worked great. I took the oil pan off, and just to let you know, there are 32 bolts that attach this thing. So a lot of little bullshit work there to do. But anyway, it came off, and there are my 32 bolts. So the next step is to start looking at the connecting rods and seeing if there's any play in there. Could be main bearings. I'm not sure where the noise is coming from, but we're going to get to the bottom of it. After taking the oil pan off, I started feeling each connecting rod cap, and I got to the second one here. And listen to that. That is the problem, or it's at least one of the problems. So I just wanted to point that out to you. At the moment I am under the car, and I just wanted to show you that the crankshaft is very clean. I don't see any major problems or burrs or scoring or flat spots or anything. I checked it all out. And here's the rod cap, and it's not that in bad shape. But the problem is, I believe this is a standard connecting rod I put in here, and like I said, this crankshaft I believe has been reground, and that's what's causing the play. You know, and again, this is a backyard mechanic thing. I didn't get plastic gauge and, you know, do everything the way the experts do it. I just slapped something in here because I wanted to limp through the summer. And this is almost a project, you know, anyway. I mean, I don't expect this to last very long, but at this point I'm just going to put a, a larger connecting rod in to make up for that play and see how many years I get out of it. And at some point I'll put one of the new engines in. But I wanted to just show you what that crankshaft looked like, and it's in fairly good shape. This is a shot of the engine, and I'm just about to start taking off the top of the engine here, because in order to take the connecting rod out, of course you got to take the head off. You can't take the connecting rod out from the bottom. So I took off the air cleaner, air filter, and first step is I'm going to drain the radiator, get the coolant out of there. Then we'll start on this and take the valve cover off, and I'll take a shot of each step so you can see what I'm doing. I am going to show you where the petcock valve is there for the radiator. It's right there. So I'm going to turn this thing and start draining the fluid, the coolant, and that's the next step. I have the valve cover off, and the I took the two 5/8 nuts on the top of the valve cover off. There's two of them to hold that on, and you know, you'll have a gasket here you'll probably need to replace. I don't know if I'm going to do it now because I'm just half-assing this, but you got a gasket here. Now you've got a 3/8 I don't know what the term of that is, but you're going to need a 3/8 inch wrench there for this oil line, because the next step in this process is we're going to take the rocker arms off here, all as one assembly. So what you're going to do is get a 3/8 inch wrench and just go half turn, half turn, half turn, whatever you're going to do, and unscrew that so this whole thing can pull off. And then what you're going to do is have you're going to need a 9/16 socket, and you're going to have to remove all of these bolts. And then you've got the ones on the bottom here too. And you just go all the way down the line, and then what we're going to do is pick this rocker assembly up off all as one piece and lay it aside. So that's the next step. But don't forget about this oil line here, because that's connected to the head, and you're going to have to disconnect that. It's not hard to do, it's just you got to use little half turns because there's not a lot of room in here to get that off. I loosened up all these bolts, and you know, on this end here, this last one, all right, and then this one over here, you're not going to have a bolt, you're going to have nuts to hold those on. Okay, so everything's going to be the same with the exception of these two end ones on the bottom. And you know, once you loosen it all up, you're going to have to pull it off, and I'm going to play with this just a little bit more because obviously something's sticking here. But I leave these bolts right in. There we go. And that way I don't have to keep them separated. So there you go. Just lift it right off. You can see the bolts are still in there. Just put it in a safe spot, and that way all the bolts are accounted for. I'm just going to put this here for now and let it dangle there. But I know it's not the safest place to put it. I'm going to move it as soon as I put this camera down. But anyway, the rocker assembly is off, and the next step is to just go ahead and take these each push rod out and just put them in a safe spot. And then the next step is to take these head bolts off, and we're moving right along. I just loosened up this bank of head bolts here, and I just wanted to show you this. By the way, you need a 3/4 inch socket, you know, for these head bolts, and you're gonna have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 here, and then you've got a back bank of head bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So you're going to have 13 back here, and you're going to have 9 on this bank here. And I'm just loosening them up I disconnected the spark plug wires. You know, years ago I labeled these things, you know, with a number. Here's number 7, and you know, here's number 5. I put these labels on here. The labels lasted for years, and you wouldn't believe how much easier that's made things on me. Just to label them so you know where they go. Anyway, we don't have to get the book and look. Now, one thing I got to point to you is here's the temperature gauge, and you're going to need to take a wrench and unscrew this. This just pulls out. So you're going to need to disconnect the temperature gauge from the head. You've got another oil line over here. So we're going to need to disconnect that just like we did over here. Remember earlier I told you about the oil line. We're going to need to disconnect this guy here. And then once we've done that, we're going to have to come around here and start working on this manifold, exhaust manifold, intake, exhaust. And you know, yours may look a little different. They use different, you know, these look like somebody just replaced them with some bolts. But the proper way of doing it is, you know, you'll have something different. It's like a piece of metal that really makes a very secure fit. And so yours may look different. But anyway, we're going to have to take these off and remove this so we can get the head off. And then of course I'm going to have to show you how to disconnect this thermostat housing and all that stuff from the head. That'll probably be the last step. And there's a gasket that goes in there. You'll have to replace the thermostat to head gasket. It's like $2.50 at Snyder's or Lang's. It's real cheap. I didn't have one the last time I did this, so I slapped some RTV sealant in there. I'm going to have to clean all that off with a brush and do it right this time. So we're moving along, and I'll continue to show you each step as this goes. But the next step I'm going to do now is start removing this back bank of head bolts, and then remove the temperature gauge I showed you over here, and the oil line over here, and then I'll give you another update. I removed the all the head bolts, and at least they're all loose. And then I disconnected the exhaust manifold and the intake manifold. You know, one thing that fell off was this here. These are these glands. You know, there's a gland here, there's one there, you can see it. This one's stuck in here, but anyway, those glands there's another one there. These are something you're going to have to deal with if you've got them. And you know, when you put it in, I forgot if I'll have to think about if they go here or if you put them in here. But anyway, they have to mesh together to keep everything in line. So be aware that those glands are something to deal with. And also, you want to keep everything straight if you can, as far as the sequence of the bolts. Now you can see I used copper clad gaskets. I prefer those. They're a little more expensive, but anyway, the important thing is to keep the bolts straight, so when you put this back on, everything lines up. Now, these two back, or this one back here, there was no bolt. It had broken off. You probably can't see it, but it's you can see that the head of it's still in there. So what I'm going to do when I take this head off, I'm going to run it up to the local machine shop, Baldwin Automotive, and pay those guys to remove that bolt professionally, and then I'll replace that. I also removed the temperature gauge here. You can see that. That was easy to do. And I removed this from the head. So what I'm going to do next is, and by the way, I should mention these bolts to take this exhaust manifold off, these were 9/16 bolts. So what I'm going to do next is focus on the thermostat housing. There are two bolts that need to come out, this one here and this one here. These two bolts go right into the head, and then this should just come off. Now it probably won't in my case because I got it glued on there with this blue RTV sealant. You won't have that problem. And then I'll give you another update after that, but I got a feeling I'm going to have to really pry and scream and swear and everything else to get this thing off because of this mess I made last time. So that's the latest. I just wanted to mention it's a 9/16 wrench you're going to need to take this bolt out here and that one there. This one's easy to take out. This one, if I recall, it backs out right against the pulley here for the water pump, and the head of the bolt presses right up against it, and it's just enough to get this thing off the head. I mean, you don't have a thousandth of an inch more to spare. I don't know why they made it that way, but anyway, so you don't have to take this pulley off or the water pump or anything, but thank goodness, because you're cutting it awfully close. Just back this out as far as you can, then this will separate from the head. But it's a 9/16 wrench you're going to need, and that's the next step. After I removed the two bolts here, I loosened that up a little bit, and this just came out. That was nice and easy. I'm going to clean this up real good. You can see the mess I made last time, and I'm going to buy a gasket. I'm going to do it right this time. I'm not going to use the blue RTV sealant. But anyway, I took the head off. You can see the situation there. And what I'm going to do now is, I should show you the head. I have the head on its side because I had to remove the gasket. I'm going to clean up the bottom of this head. You can see there's a lot of gasket material on there. And I'm going to take it in. See how there's a stud here? It's coming out. This actually, I can unscrew this right now. I can take it right out. I'm going to get another one of these from Bob's Automobilia or Cars or one of the places, and I'm going to have this professionally removed at Baldwin Automotive, so that way everything will be done correctly. But anyway, everything's going pretty well. You notice I left the head bolts in just because I don't want to have to mark them and all that stuff. I just left them in and took it out that way, so everything just goes back in place. And now the next step is going to be to take this number 2 piston out and put a new connecting rod in that fits around the crankshaft better. I have a bunch of different connecting rods that I purchased that are different sizes. You know, I know I mentioned this before, but this is a Babbitt engine, so it's not as simple as just miking it out with a micrometer and going and getting the right insert bearing. If I take this into a shop, well, they'll do it right, but it'll cost me a fortune because they're not going to give me a Babbitt bearing a connecting rod. They're going to replace every connecting rod in this car after they take the crankshaft out and grind it, and you know, they're going to have a new connecting rods, new insert bearings. I mean, it's going to cost a fortune. This engine's on its way out anyway. So again, this is just a backyard mechanic video I'm making here just to show you that I'm going to put a tighter fitting connecting rod on this so there's no play in it, and it'll quiet the engine up, and it might last me a couple years, maybe longer. I don't know. I'll keep you posted. So anyway, you can see this is really not a very difficult job to get that. I went from underneath the car and I pushed the connecting rod up. So the rings, you know, were above the head there. And what that means, of course, is that, you know, you're going to have to use a ring compressor, you know, to put these back in. That's not a big deal. I'll show you how to do that. That's very simple. I just got a ring compressor from Harbor Freight. It wasn't very expensive. Don't be intimidated by that. So anyway, this is the situation. You know, here it is. And now what I'm going to do is replace this connecting rod with, and you know, in one of the earlier videos I said a larger one. I don't mean a larger connecting rod. What I mean is one with more Babbitt. You know, there's different size Babbitt connecting rods you can buy. I think they go up every 1,000th or 10,000th or whatever. And I bought so many of them, I'm just going to match it up with one that fits correctly around the crankshaft. I think this is standard, so I'm going to go with a 0.10, then I'll try a 0.20, then I'll try a 0.30, and until I get it matched up correctly, because, you know, we're not using insert bearings where we mic it out and then use the right insert bearing. This is Babbitt here. So I'm going to take this connecting rod off the piston and start playing around and match it up right, put everything back together and see how it sounds. But, you know, as you can see, this was not a difficult job to do today. You know, if you put your mind to it, it's not that tough. And you know, you are going to have to use a ring compressor, but other than that, putting stuff back is even easier than taking it off, so it's not going to be tough. I took the old connecting rod off the piston, and the way to do that is, you know, it's got this piston pin, wrist pin or whatever they call this thing, which goes inside, and there's a screw. I don't know if you can see the opening there, and it's kind of tricky getting that screw back in because there's a ridge in there that you got to line up just right, and you'll see. It's hard to show on the film, but you'll see what I mean. So I pounded this out with you know, one of these. I just stuck it in there and pounded it out, and then it all came apart. But here's the problem. The bolt broke off in there, so I got to run up to the hardware store and get a new bolt to put onto this one. One thing I got to explain is, you know, I went onto eBay over time, and I buy these connecting rods when I see them. And this one here is a 0.20. So what that means, and I know I'm probably stating the obvious for a lot of people, but the amount of Babbitt that's in here with this 0.20, this is a standard, and the amount of Babbitt that's in here is just a little bit more than what's in here, and it makes up for the, so while this was loose, maybe this will be the right size. Also notice that there's some shims in here that you can take out. Can you see that shim? And it, you know, these come with shims, so you can either take it, you know, there's forgiveness there. There's play. You know, you can add a couple shims, take a couple shims out, to just completely remove the shims, whatever. And if this is too loose, then I'm going to go to a 0.3, which I have over here. But I just have a feeling this 0.2 is going to work. And if it's too tight, then we'll drop down to a 0.1. We know it has to be somewhere above standard. So anyway, that's the situation. I got to go get the go to the hardware store and get a new bolt for this thing that I broke off. And it seems like I remember last time, those aren't exactly easy to put in, because you got to get it just in the groove just right. Then we're going to compress these rings, put it in, and then we put the car in neutral and we turn the flywheel with our right hand, and then with the left hand we pull like hell on this and see if there's any play. That's how I do it. I don't use plastic gauge and all that shit, and I just do it by feel. And I got a feeling this is going to work. And I have a feeling it's going to work for a couple of years, maybe more. I'm prepared to put the rod and the piston back in right now, and what I wanted to do is tell you that, you know, when you do this, you got to go underneath the car and turn the flywheel with your hand while the car's in neutral, so that the crankshaft journal is down at the bottom, you know, the lowest spot down there. Because when you go ahead and you put this thing down the bore, you don't want to hit anything and nick the crankshaft or score it or anything. So you want to turn the crankshaft so that the journal again is down near the ground, the lowest spot. And in order to do this, you're going to need a ring compressor. This is one I bought from Harbor Freight, and the way it's a little hard to do with one hand holding the camera here, but you put this around here and you turn this thing with this tool that comes with the spring compressor, and you just get it as tight as you can. And once you have it as tight as you can, you put it in here, and you know, it'll drop down naturally there, but it'll be around here, of course. And then you take a rubber mallet with a block of wood or something, and just pound it down. Now that's the trick. You know, you're going to have to pound it a little forcefully, but not anything to damage the piston. So that's something you're just going to have to feel it out. It's not a tap. You're going to have to give it a whack to get it down in there, but you know, nothing that's so crazy that you end up busting the head of the piston. It's just something you'll have to feel on your own. And anyway, once you do that, you know, you push this down and you meet it with the crank journal down there. You put the cap on, tighten it up, torque it up, and hopefully you've taken the play out. You may end up having a couple shims that you have to take in or take out or put in, you know, to adjust it. I don't use the plastic gauge. I don't have time for that shit, so I just do it by feel, by hand, by turning the crankshaft with my hand, or I'm sorry, by turning the flywheel with my hand and rotating the crankshaft and then just feeling the rod. If it's so tight that the crankshaft won't turn, well then you know you've done something wrong, or the connecting rod that you've used has too much babbitt. You're gonna have to, I used a 0.20, I might need a 0.1, we'll find out. So anyway, the next shot I'll show you is with the rings compressed and my tapping this in to the bore. I just want to show you how that's done. This is what I mean when I say to have the crank journal down at the lowest spot. That's the position you want it in, so when that connecting rod comes down, it doesn't nick it. And then you can, it's easier to work down here and then put the cap on and tighten everything up if it's in this spot. Well, I wanted to get a shot of me pounding this thing in, but it just popped it real easily. I compressed it, and I took this little thing and I tapped it in, and it went right down in there. So it's set now. And I can push it down with my finger. And now I'm going to go underneath the car and mate the cap with the connecting rod, tighten it up, and see how it feels. So you can see this is not very difficult, and we're moving right along. I put the connecting rod on and the bearing cap with the 0.20, and it was way too tight. I went to turn this flywheel here with my hand, and because I had the car in neutral, and this crankshaft would not even turn. I mean, it was locked tight. So I knew the 0.0 was way too tight, so I put a 0.1 in, and I kept the shims that came with it. I just left everything in, and there is no noise. It feels good. You know, it's solid on there. There's no knock. You know, and you want to check it. You want to move the flywheel a little bit and check, you know, every position to make sure there aren't any loose spots, to make sure you've got a good snug fit. But look, I mean, this thing is it was a 0.1. That's the bottom line. So, you know, it took a little time to figure that out, but the 0.2 was just way too much babbitt. So there you go. Now we're going to button and you can see I took this one off, and I took some of the others. I just want to look at them to make sure there's no scoring on the crankshaft, but this was the one that was making the rod knock. So I think we're good to go. I'm going to check a couple things out, and then we're going to button this thing up and listen to it. I think it's going to work. I think it's going to work for a long time. Certainly enough to get me through a few more years. But that's it. So, you know, there was a lot of play in this, as you heard in the beginning of the video, and it only took a 0.1 to clear that clearance up. So 0.2 is way too much. Anyway, there you go. I buttoned everything up and put the oil pan back on with all those little bolts that go around there. And one thing I wanted to mention, and this doesn't appear on the video, but there was another connecting rod that I looked at that I wasn't happy with. Not that second one I'd been working on here in the video, but there was another one. And I spent a lot of time playing with that thing, with the shims, taking the shim out, putting a shim in. And you know, those shims, if you look real closely, you can peel them apart, so they're stuck together. And anyway, that took me, I don't know, at least an hour playing back and forth to get that feel just right, so that there was no play in the connecting rod, but at the same rate the engine wasn't so tight that the thing wouldn't spin when it was in neutral, and I would try to turn it with the flywheel. So you might run into that same situation where, you know, it just goes on and on and on playing with those shims. But that's what you got to do, because the engine can't be so tight that it won't turn. On the other hand, you can't have any play in those connecting rods, or you're going to hear it once the engine starts. So just be aware of that. But right now I'm pretty satisfied with what I feel and what I hear. So we're going to button everything back up and see how this thing sounds. Now what I've done also is I put the head back on, and these head bolts are just in finger tight right now. I'm going to go torque it down with the correct torque settings with a torque wrench. But anyway, everything's back on. The head gaskets, a new head gasket is in. I cleaned up the block and the bottom of the head. So we're good to go. And I got my gaskets in. I bought them from Cars, C-A-R-S, because I thought I'd give them a try. Normally I get stuff from Bob's Old Automobile. In my opinion, they're just as good. But this time I tried Cars. So they just came in, and I'm going to put the correct gasket on here and button everything up and see how this thing sounds. Oh, I should also mention that this head was at the shop, and I had that exhaust manifold bolt drilled out. It cost me 10 bucks at Baldwin Automotive. Those guys are great. Anyway, so it's good to go, and I can put new studs in over here because that one back here was drilled out, so we're all good to go. Anyway, this is kind of exciting. We'll see how this works now. I wanted to mention something. There is one part to this job that I consider to be the hardest part of this entire job. None of this was really all that difficult, but there's one thing, and I wanted to make a note of this on the video because I remember this. I forgot it until recently, but I remember last time I had the same feeling, that putting this exhaust and intake manifold back onto the head, bolting it back on, is the most difficult part. This shit never lines up. The gaskets keep falling down. You got to put the bolts through the holes in the gasket, otherwise they keep falling down, and you got to pick them up off the floor. This was a big goddamn hassle. And this is the one part of the job I hate. None of the other parts were, super difficult, but this here was. So unfortunately that happened at the end, but I spent a lot of time today and I'm working alone. Maybe it'd be easier if you had somebody, because this thing's heavier than hell to pick this assembly up and to get these bolts to line up. So anyway, it's in now. I'm just going to tighten everything down. You see a bunch of debris here because I spilled some oil when I was putting oil in, and the damn paper towel broke apart. But anyway, that's what the debris is here. And I spilled the oil just because I'm so tired. But anyway, just know that this is not exactly easy to line everything up here and put this back on. That's the one part of the job. Okay. Okay, I wanted you to hear the engine. One thing I got to mention is that when I put this all back together, the car ran really rough. It was misfiring, and what I did is I took some carb cleaner and I sprayed it right here where the exhaust manifold is, and every time I sprayed in a certain area over here, the idle changed, and the car stopped misfiring for a second. So what that meant was this exhaust manifold was not on correctly. The glands that are inside the intake manifold were not matched up. I mean, it might have been a thousandth of an inch off or something. Anyway, I unbolted this thing, bolted it back in, and started the car. And then as soon as I did that, I sprayed some more carb cleaner right here, and the idle didn't change. Everything was okay. So at the moment, I don't hear, at least when the car's at idle, I don't hear the rod knock, and I'm going to take it for a spin right now and see how it sounds. Okay, I am cruising along right now, and the rod knock is gone. The car sounds pretty quiet. The car's got pep and it's got speed. So as far as I'm concerned, this was a success. We'll see how long it lasts. I got a feeling it's going to last a while. So this completes it.